I am a person who is very fascinated with the horror genre, but not so much the horror movies that are released in cinemas. Of course, there are a few notable examples. I've talked about The Lighthouse before on this channel, but overall, my fascination with horror lies in the creators that exist here on YouTube or in the online space in general. And today we are going to be talking about what has quickly become one of my favorite online horror series of all time, The Oldest View. This is a new series by YouTube creator Kane Pixels, who is most known for his Backrooms found footage series that took the internet by storm. As a matter of fact, this series got so much attention that Kane Pixels and the film studio A24 are currently in the stages of production on a Backrooms movie. And in the midst of production on this movie, as well as the writer's strike that is thankfully now ended, Kane creates this series and uploads it to his channel, called The Oldest View. The best way that I could describe both of these series is that they are a perfect example of both found footage horror and liminal horror. While the first of these titles is pretty self-explanatory with notable examples like the Blair Witch Project, liminal horror is the sense of dread and unease derived from unusual architecture. The actual term liminal refers to a crossroads or a passing from one state to another or one location to another, and this liminal space is the space in between. But in horror, it has come to mean something a little bit different. Liminal horror can be experienced through seemingly impossible architecture or through the experience of going through an abandoned place that is typically filled with people. The uncanny valley is used to describe things that look human but aren't quite human, and the uncanny valley describes the sense of dread that we derive from that image. And liminal spaces and liminal horror is the uncanny valley of architecture in a sense. It is a very dreadful concept when utilized properly, and Kane Pixels is a master of liminal horror at this point. And The Oldest View is, in my opinion, at least at this point, the apex of his skill at this craft. And so today we will be diving into the events of this series, and I will give my thoughts on what I think the story is about, because I think the story is something very special. It is the story of a man stumbling into horrors beyond his understanding. It is the story of a mall lost in space and in time. And of course, it is the story of a giant that lurks within this complex. This is the story of The Oldest View. But first, a word from our sponsor. I'm on a mission to make content creation my job, and to do that, I need your help. In the description, there is a link to my Patreon where you can support me in exchange for benefits, as well as a link to my Twitch channel where you can support me through subscriptions and bits, as well as a PayPal if you're feeling generous. Thanks for listening to my speech, and we're gonna get back to the video. We begin with episode 1, entitled Renewal. This is a great introduction to the series as it lays the groundwork for the feeling that this story is going to evoke, while also giving away nothing. We open on a nature scene. We are surrounded by trees, and the camera is focused on a single small flower. And the use of color in this scene is also very striking, because every color in this scene is in black and white, except for the color green. The only color that we get to see is that of the beautiful forest surrounding us. After a while, a man comes into view and begins admiring the flower. He is wearing very fancy, old-fashioned clothes and has a long, well-groomed beard. This physical description is not so important to us now, but it will be in my analysis. We are shown more shots of nature as the man walks through this untouched forest. The green of the trees and the grass are the only color that we see. The man sits on a log overhanging a river, and there, in the midst of the beauty of nature, he begins to read. We fade to a new scene, and the song When the Swallows Homeward Fly by Alan Thompson begins playing. We see close-ups of someone measuring and tracing lines on cardboard. The hands cut out shapes and hot glue pieces together. Whoever this is, they are making something with the cardboard. We get a glimpse at this craftsman's reference notes, and we see that he is either making some kind of mask or head out of cardboard. And whoever this craftsman is also pulls out flowers and branches to add to his project. The final shot slowly zooms out to reveal the face that the craftsman is working on. The music becomes progressively more and more distorted, and then the episode ends. This is a great introduction to the series because this means nothing to us now, but after watching the whole series, it will mean everything. But before that, we move on to episode 2, Beneath the Earth. The opening shot is a shot of the forest canopy. As we sit there and admire the branches above us, some ominous sounds start getting louder and louder in our ears. And then the video transitions into a YouTube vlog. No, I'm not kidding.
What's up, guys? Wyatt here. I hope you're all having a great day. I know I am.
We are introduced to our protagonist of the series, Wyatt, who is played by none other than Kane Pixels himself. Wyatt is talking to his YouTube audience. It appears that he found something while walking through a park, and now he has returned with a camera to show his audience. He doesn't share where this location is, admitting that he is trespassing on private property, but he pursues it anyways. He even passes a sign saying that the area is closed and that hiking and biking is prohibited, but he continues on. And based on his language, we can conclude that what he has found, he describes as a secret tunnel in the middle of the woods. He comes to a large tree, and at the base of this tree is a hole in the ground, just large enough for a person to squeeze through. And in that hole, we can see a tunnel and stairs that seem to go on for forever. Wyatt then enters the hole and begins to descend these stairs, going further and further underground. And I'm going to mention this now because I think it's so cool, but from this point on, the staircase and everything that we see beyond it are fake. I believe that the park and the trees are very much real, but everything beyond that was made in a software called Blender. Blender is an open source 3D graphics software. People use this software from anything from modeling, animation, to game development. And in this case, Kane Pixels is using Blender to create a massive complex, one that is not easily recognizable as fake. I just wanted to point that out because it's insanely impressive to me that it looks so real. The tunnel is very narrow and made of either concrete or stone. After some time of descending this staircase, he comes to a 90-degree turn in the hallway, and when he looks around this corner, he sees that the stairs continue descending downwards beyond visible range. It is here that Wyatt makes the second mistake of the series and continues descending down this staircase. The first mistake, of course, being entering this hole at all. Further down this staircase, the lights go out entirely, but he continues pressing onward. He makes the offhand comment to himself that this tunnel smells like freshly mowed grass. Again, this is something that doesn't really mean anything to us now, but possibly will later. And then finally, at the bottom of this massive underground staircase, he finds an old wooden door. The paint on the door is cracked and peeling, and the tiles around the door feel very decrepit. He opens the door to reveal an even more decrepit-looking tiled room. On the opposite side of this room is some form of door or gate made out of rusted iron. When Wyatt looks through the openings of this door, he sees a much cleaner, empty space. The only recognizable item in this space is what looks to be a store kiosk. And at this point, we very faintly begin to hear very relaxing, almost elevator-sounding music. He crawls under the door and into this room, only now making the observation that he really shouldn't be here. Yeah, you probably shouldn't be. He inspects the object in the room, and it really does look like a kiosk where you would go to pay for your items in a store. He turns to face the opposite side of the room and sees one of those curtain-style cage doors, the ones that you see in malls when businesses are closing for the day. And sure enough, he looks out a window and sees what looks like a massive shopping center, one buried deep underground. In the middle of a forest and hundreds of feet below the surface of the earth is a mall, one complete with giant chandeliers, escalators, and many, many shopping centers. This is the end of episode 2. And I want to emphasize at this point that these episodes are being released months apart. Episode 1 was released on March 18th of this year, and episode 2 was released on May 14th, so people waited 2 months between that initial teaser and this video that I just described. And episode 3, the episode that I'm about to talk about, was released on October 8th. There was a nearly 5-month gap between episodes 2 and 3. And probably the biggest reason for that is the insane amount of detail and effort that went in to creating this final episode. So with that, we're gonna move on to episode 3, The Rolling Giant. The last episode was 12 minutes long, but this episode is 46 minutes. The episode begins the same way the last one did, with a shot of the same forest that keeps recurring throughout this series. And then we get another vlog-style YouTube intro from our hero, Wyatt.
What's good, guys? Wyatt here, back again.
I use the term hero very loosely. He is the protagonist. He says that it's been a few days since he entered the mall in the previous video, and while he has been back to the hole several times in the interim, he has not ventured underground since then. He also mentions that he would have made this video a lot sooner, but his classes were making it difficult to get out to the hole again. He also mentions that he recently switched at his university to the business program, and that means that our protagonist Wyatt is a business major. So keep that in mind, because no matter what happens in this episode, he had it coming. He also mentions how so many people in his audience said that maybe he shouldn't go back. It is private property and he is trespassing. However, his curiosity is eating him alive and he has to know what this is all about. He has to know what lurks underground.
And I already know, like, you guys are gonna say that's totally sketch. It's private property. All right, so sue me. If the landowners find this, sue me. Go ahead, try to do that. Yeah, but there's no way I'm walking away from this thing. I need answers.
Whatever this is so alien to him and so alien to humanity in general that he has to know. He mentions that his botany professor let him borrow a couple trail cams that he placed outside of the hole to see if there was any activity, if any people or animals came in and out. However, these cameras yielded no results. While this detail isn't necessarily important, the fact that Wyatt was in a botany class will be important to something that I'll talk about at the very end of the video. After some time of walking, he comes back to the hole and the entrance to this massive staircase, which looks the exact same as it did in the last video. And once again, he descends the stairs, rounds the corner, and makes his way down to that same decrepit-looking door. And he goes through the same series of rooms, but this time, he doesn't stop there. He begins opening the cage door, which slides up on its own with a loud bang. This isn't anything paranormal, it's just the springs in the door's mechanism, but the noise still spooks Wyatt, who runs back to the staircase. He considers leaving in this moment, but curiosity is a very powerful motivator. So with that, he creeps forward and steps in to the mall. And I want to re-emphasize here, all that you are seeing was rendered in the Blender graphics engine. All that you are seeing is completely CGI, yet it looks so good. Wyatt is now wandering through what many would consider the pinnacle of liminal spaces, an abandoned mall deep underground in the dark. And in a brief moment of comedy here in this limbo of architecture, Wyatt makes the offhand comment,
"This is literally like the backrooms from TikTok."
I just find that hilarious because Kane is the person who popularized the backrooms again. and made so many other creators start making Backrooms content. And then Wyatt stumbles into this like massive underground foreboding structure, and he's like, oh, it's like from the TikToks, the Backrooms. Oh. It's so good. It's so good. I love this series. One of the most terrifying things about Wyatt's situation currently is the vastness of the architecture around him, combined with the fact that the lights are off, means that there's a lot of open and dark spaces that we can't see into. Wyatt begins to become a little paranoid, shifting very fast, darting his eyes to look at these spots of darkness. He never says it, but his fear is the same as everyone who is watching this series. The fear that there is something in the darkness looking back at him. This is a dreadful concept, but don't worry, it gets much worse. He begins to speculate on the nature of this structure. Why is there a giant mall underground? Who would build this? What is the purpose of an underground mall? And while he ponders, he keeps wandering through a vast wing of this mall. He then comes to a sign where we are given our first look at something probably not good. This is a promotional sign for the Parade of Giants celebration in Dallas, Texas. And on the sign is this nightmarish looking giant. It has a long black hair and a long beard. Its hands are made of branches and flowers reaching outwards. He comes to the end of one of the wings of this mall, and at the very end is this giant mural of an octopus. And then...
That scared the shit out of me.
the giant we got a glimpse of on that sign is now here, deep underground in the mall with Wyatt. And the thing that we didn't see on the sign that we do now is that this thing is massive. It is at least 15 feet tall, and its head is mere feet away from the massive ceiling above. It is stood in place with its hands splayed outwards. This image spooks Wyatt, but clearly not enough, because he moves closer, though he is clearly very put off by this giant. As he stares at the giant, he hears a sudden noise behind him, causing him to spin around rapidly.
Oh, fuck.
And we see that the noise came from the lights at the very end of the wing coming on. The calm ambient music also kicks back in, and the mall comes back to life. He makes his way back towards the center of the mall, which is now illuminated. And now that the lights are on and we are seeing things in more detail, I want to re-emphasize that all that you are seeing is CGI. It really is impressive that multi-billion-dollar film studios still turn out bad CGI results, yet this independent creator on YouTube was able to make this. Wyatt is fully spooked at this moment. Now that the power is back on, he makes the rightful assumption that whoever owns this mall that he is trespassing in is now down here with him. And if they catch him trespassing, then he'll be in big trouble. It's very ironic that his greatest fear is that a person will find him here underground, when the real threat was right in front of him the whole time. He bolts for the room that has the staircase that leads out of here. However, it seems that he tempted the hand of fate too many times.
We're done. We're out.
Because when he turns to face the tunnel, he sees that it is completely collapsed. Whatever this underground mall is, he is now trapped inside it.
No. Fuck no. Come on. Wait.
Remember, kids, this is what happens when you decide to be a business major. He now has no choice but to try and find another exit out of this mall. At this point, the lights are almost entirely on, except for the lights in the hallways of this mall. We can see into the different wings, but everything in the hallways is silhouetted against those lights. He passes by more posters of the Parade of Giants, including a portrait of this man, who we will talk about at the very end. At the end of this wing is a large mall exit with the glass sliding doors. However, through this glass, all that we can see is the stone of the earth he is trapped under. It's almost as if this mall simply spawned underground and is now encased in the rock around it. So if he's going to get out, it won't be through those exits. He makes his way back to the center of the mall and looks once again down the wing where the octopus and the giant were. While we can now see the octopus mural in much greater detail, the giant is now gone. This is probably bad. Now Wyatt is in a state of full paranoia. He is constantly looking around him as if expecting the giant to appear around any corner. As he walks, the power begins to flicker and the music becomes slightly out of tune. And as he looks across the plaza, we see the massive silhouette of the giant. He then makes the huge IQ decision to get closer to it. Wyatt, why do you do this? He walks to the wing that the giant was stood in, but it's no longer there. He continues walking, but is understandably very paranoid. He walks down a new wing and finds what looks like a massive skylight overlooking a children's play area. And he goes to a door that says that it leads to an art studio. But when he looks through, however, it seems to lead into some kind of underground forest. It is fully dark, but we can make out the outline of trees and bushes, and very faintly in the distance you can hear birds chirping. How is there a forest ecosystem in this mall? Great question. Moving on, Wyatt wheels around, hearing what sounds like machinery and wheels squeaking. It also sounds like a scream to me, but I don't think that was the intention. He walks back the way he came towards the source of this noise, but as he does so, Wyatt hears the sound of wheels behind him and turns to see the figure of the giant looming over him. And no, there is no secret hallway that could allow the giant to just sneak up on him. Whatever this thing is, it appeared behind him. We can also see that this giant is on wheels, so for the rest of this episode, I'll be referring to it both as the giant or as the rolling giant, in honor of this episode. Wyatt begins to get closer, which... why? If I were friends with Wyatt and we were both trapped in this underground mall together with a giant that had just appeared behind us and he started to get closer to it, I think I would simply just start strangling him. He calls out, assuming that someone is pranking him, but nobody comes forward. Here in this hallway, we get a better look at the scale of this giant as we see that the head of this thing is less than an inch away from the ceiling of the hallway above it. He begins to back away, but as soon as he turns around, we hear the sound of wheels rolling behind Wyatt. And when he turns back, the giant is closer to him. So not only is he trapped in this mall deep underground, but there's also a weeping angel after him. Almost pleading with the giant at this point, Wyatt says that he's just trying to find an escape, find a way out of this mall. And as he backs away, he tries to convince himself that someone is just controlling the giant and trying to mess with him. The sound of thunder and the flickering of lights makes Wyatt turn around, but as soon as he does, of course, the giant comes even closer. Another peal of thunder is heard and Wyatt fully turns around, but this time, the rolling giant has had enough.
Hey!
Now it charges full bore at him, running into a pillar as it does, and Wyatt turns and begins sprinting away. He makes it to the escalator where the giant can't follow him. The two stare at each other for a moment before the rolling giant turns around and rolls back the way it came. and at the top of the escalator, the lights are flickering and more spooky noises are heard. Feeling no desire to see what that's about, and seeing that the rolling giant is far enough away, he sprints back down the escalator and down one of the wings of this mall. The giant sees this and begins charging again. He gets to the very end of this wing and sees that there is no exit, and the giant is closing in fast. I want to take a brief break from the action to say that this video, and this scene in particular, really does a good job at capturing the essence of a childhood nightmare. This is why I love liminal horror so much. It is the nostalgia of familiar places being poisoned against you. And this sequence is so effective to me because I have had nightmares very similar to this before. This was a recurring nightmare that I had as a child. I was trapped in an abandoned school, except there were no rooms in this school building, just infinite hallways of lockers. I didn't know what liminal spaces were at the time, but looking back on this dream, it felt very liminal. I was trapped in this labyrinth of lockers, and there was something in there that was coming to get me. I never saw this creature in detail, but it was a massive, dark figure stalking the halls. Whatever it was, it always knew where I was. No matter how many halls I turned around to try and lose it, it always knew. I remember in this dream running, knowing that there was something behind me, but not knowing what it was. And I remember this very specific moment where I stopped at the corner at the intersection of two hallways. And I stopped and I peeked around the corner to try and get a look at this thing. And I see this massive dark shape slowly come into view. And before I could discern any details of it, I kept running. This is a nightmare that I had more than once, though I haven't had it in over a decade at this point. This scene in particular recreates that exact same feeling for me, which is why I find it so effective. But now back to Wyatt in the mall. He is trapped in this wing, but he notices that one of the windows of an abandoned store in this mall is boarded shut. Having no way out in this situation, he begins slamming his body violently into this boarded up window, which eventually gives way. The room he stumbles into looks like some kind of unfinished construction area, but he takes no time to observe the environment around him given the circumstances. He turns to see the giant roll up to the glass, but then bolts for the exit door. As he runs through it, we hear the sound of shattering glass. The giant is still coming after him. He enters what looks like a maintenance hallway for the mall, but continues running. One of the creepier sound design elements in this scene is that as Wyatt is bolting down this hallway, we hear this bellowing moan echo through the hallway around us. This is presumably the sound of the giant. Hearing the sound of wheels behind him, he ducks into a door. The door is normal size, so presumably the giant won't be able to follow him into there. And here in this room, he hides. And after a while, he begins exploring the room that he now finds himself in. At the end of this room he is in is a regular entrance into the mall, but now he is taking no chances with the massive halls of this mall, knowing that the giant is out there. And so he darts into another smaller hallway and comes upon what looks like a series of office rooms. He finds a desk with various documents on it, and one of those documents is a floor plan to the mall that he is trapped in. The amount of detail is crazy considering this is all CGI. The documents look aged and even have like a little coffee ring stain on it. It's perfect. He uses these documents to confirm where he is in the mall, then continues going, finding more documents as he goes. One of these includes a list of all of the mall's exits, which gives Wyatt at least a little bit of hope. At the end of a hallway, he finds a door, and faintly heard beyond this door is the ambient music of the mall, meaning that this is probably an entrance back into the mall itself. He opens the door, but the mall that he sees isn't the mall that he left. The place is now decrepit, looking as though it's been abandoned for years. The walls are falling apart, the floor is wet, and there are trees and bushes growing everywhere. It seems as though this mall is slowly being reclaimed by nature, even though we are far, far underground. It looks as though he has shifted forward in time, and the mall around him is falling apart. And littered all around the place are signs with the visage of the rolling giant. Knowing that the exits are on the floor above him, he darts from cover to cover, trying to reach the escalator. And finally, as he makes a run for it, now being pursued by the giant, he runs around the plaza. As he screams, the mall comes to life around him. It seems not only that the giant is after him, but it seems as though the spirit of the mall itself is now after him. He reaches another escalator and climbs to the top, now safe from the giant. The elevator up there is out of order, however he sees a sign pointing to a ramp that says the rooftop exit is just beyond it. And as he climbs to the top, he sees...
You fucking kidding me?
The giant has somehow climbed up the escalator and now faces Wyatt. Wyatt asks this giant what it wants, and in response, we see the lights flicker, and hidden in the flashes of these lights, we see the bodies of dead men and horses strewn around this giant. After this display, the giant charges the ramp Wyatt is still standing on.
Oh, shit.
Wyatt begins to hurriedly make his way to the exit. There is nothing separating him from the massive 3-story drop below him. The force of the giant hitting the wall cracks the support beams, and now the platform that Wyatt is slowly shimmying across is very unstable. He makes his way along the edge of the wall. There is an exit in sight. He looks and sees that the giant is now rolling away. He is now safe from the giant's threats, and the exit is getting closer and closer. He peeks through a hole cut into the wall, and he sees concrete stairs leading upwards, just like the stairs that he took down to this place in the first place. However, it appears his escape wasn't meant to be. Wyatt falls all 3 stories to his death. We then cut to the forest, the same forest that we have seen in all 3 episodes. And laying on the bed of the forest floor is the dead body of Wyatt, as the color slowly drains from his face and his clothes, leaving only green left. He tried to explore forces beyond his understanding, and now he is suffering the consequences of his curiosity. His body will exist in this inexplicable forest for the rest of time, eventually becoming part of the forest. The final shot is of the twisted trees of the forest, and peering out from behind one of them is the face of the rolling giant, who has claimed one more victim. And this is the conclusion, at least for now, of The Oldest View. This series is a testament to Kane's evolution as a creator and as a filmmaker. It is the pinnacle, at least so far, of his career. He is a master of found footage horror and liminal horror, and in this series he uses both to maximum effect. He is extremely talented, and I cannot wait to see what he does next. But for now, let's talk about the accomplishment of The Oldest View and what I believe this series is about. But before I talk about that, I want to put forward my idea or my theory on what the rolling giant is, because much is left up to speculation and will probably be elaborated on in future installments of this series. My theory is that the rolling giant is some sort of protective spirit of nature. From the end of this series, we see that the giant dwells in this forest, and it is possible that he saw Wyatt as a threat to this forest and was protecting the forest from Wyatt. Towards the end of the video, as the giant seems to become more and more powerful, the mall becomes more and more decrepit, being overtaken by nature. The mall was being slowly consumed by the forest, and possibly the mall is a liminal space between reality and this forest, because the term liminal is typically used to describe the transition or a crossroads between two different states and two different places. So it's possible that this mall is some kind of gateway to this inexplicable forest. And there's another point that backs up my assertion on what the giant is that I will talk about a little bit later. In this series, Wyatt is kind of not only meant to represent our curiosity towards nature and the world around us, but also our need to dominate it. And in our hubris, in Wyatt's hubris, he believed that there wouldn't be any consequences. The giant is a representation of the natural world fighting back. And I also want to briefly mention just the accomplishment of what Kane did to bring this mall to life. As I've said, this mall is entirely CGI. Everything that you see was built in a computer. In a live stream with WhittyGuy that Kane was a part of, he mentioned that in that final sequence where you can see down all the hallways at once and there is this ridiculous amount of shading and detail and stuff, every individual frame or still image of that sequence took up to 10 minutes to render. And there are hundreds, if not thousands of frames in that sequence. So rendering out this entire mall simulation was no small task. And I want to commend Kane and his team, if he has one, for that. The amount of time, effort, and money that went into this series, and this video in particular, cannot be overstated. So absolutely, if you haven't already, watch this series for yourself, support Kane Pixels, because he absolutely deserves it for the amount of dedication that he pours into these projects. Now on to what I think this series is really about, and to do that, I have to share some details that I think make this series very special. Take a look at these shots from the series of the mall complex. And now take a look at this video posted on YouTube 6 years ago. This is the Valley View Center in Dallas, Texas. The mall, from the oldest view, is a one-to-one recreation of a real-life mall. The Valley View Center was first constructed in the 60s and 70s, but unfortunately in the 90s began a series of financial hardships that would span for decades afterwards. Eventually in 2022, the mall was closed for good, and in May of 2023, the Valley View Center was demolished. Kane was able to acquire old plans from this mall and used those to recreate the entire mall for this series. This is the pinnacle of liminal spaces. Not only is it an abandoned mall underground that Wyatt is exploring, it is the ghost of a dead mall, a mall that was but isn't anymore. And I'll come back to this idea, but first I want to show you something else. Not only was the mall real, but take a look at that same video from 6 years ago.
Now here's a fun little fact for you. This weird puppet statue, this man with the beard, was actually used in a play at my high school. But now it is standing here right outside of the former Dillard's entrance.
That's right. The rolling giant is real. Or rather, was real. Like the signs in the series say, this giant was created for the Dallas Parade of Giants. It was created by artist Kevin Obergen, and it depicts a French botanist by the name of Julien Reverchon. This is the portrait of the man that we saw earlier, and portraits of him can be seen throughout this video. if you're looking hard enough. Not only was he a botanist, but he was also one of the first botanists to travel to the Americas. For Europeans of the time, he was a pioneer of this new natural world. A botanist not only studies the natural world, but also studies humanity's impact on the environment around them. This ties into my theory on the giant being this protective spirit of nature. Reverchon was a botanist who loved the world around him and wanted to preserve it. The giant could possibly be the spirit of Reverchon, protecting his forest from the encroachment of society. And that's all my theory talk out of the way. Back to what I think the real story of the oldest view is about. After the Parade of Giants, the giant found its home in the Valley View Center. And when the mall was eventually demolished, the giant went with it. The last known photos of the giant from this stage, it is just a pile of cloth and branches melting in a pool of acidic liquid, forever entombed in a now forgotten mall. At least, until this series came out. Outside of the people who went to this mall, you wouldn't have heard of the Valley View Center or the rolling giant within it if Kane hadn't made this series. And you wouldn't know about Julien Reverchon, the botanist, who inspired the statue. Knowing all of this stuff, episode 1 is a much bigger deal, because the man in the forest is Julien Reverchon. Here in this new world with unexplored nature around him, he sits and basks in its beauty and pores over his notes on the life around him. And as we see in the final scene of this series, the ghost of Reverchon that lives in the giant is there too. We have the botanist and the protector all in the same inexplicable forest. And the craftsman from episode 1 is Kevin Obergen, bringing the statue, bringing the rolling giant to life. There may be lore to the oldest view that will be expanded on in future episodes, but I wanted to talk about why this series is special to me, because this series is about legacy, and it is about memory. You see, when places or people die, they experience two deaths. There is the first death, which is the physical death, the actual passing on, the destruction of a place or the death of a person. And then there is the second death. Which is when all memory and all thought of this person or this place fade from people's memory, and they are completely forgotten. Reverchon died in 1905, and the Valley View Center was demolished in 2023. However, because of the work of Kevin Obergen and Kane Pixels, the legacy and memory of both will live on, forever intertwined. Perhaps when Wyatt died at the end of this series and the color fades from him kind of indicates his passing from reality into memory. Just like Reverchon, the mall itself is like a memory or a dream. While it may be gone, it will live on in the minds of all the people who went to it and in the minds of the people who watched this series. And the thought of ideas fading into memory is very special to me, especially now. You see, just last week, my parents listed their house for sale. This is the house that we built ourselves and have been living in since 2011. And I knew it was coming. They've been in the process of moving for some time now. But still, this house holds importance to me. And now when I see pictures of the house listing online, it feels very liminal to me, because now this house is just a transitory state between the life that we've lived in it and the new life that we're going to be moving on to. And pretty soon, at least for me, this house will only exist as a memory. That is what the oldest view is about. It is the story of a forgotten man and a forgotten mall. It is Kane using his prowess as a creator to deliver one simple message from both on their behalf. Remember us. And in this way, the events of the series aren't really important, or at least they aren't really the point. Though Kane has said he will do future episodes of this series, so maybe the lore and the story will be expanded on in the future. But for now, what really matters about this series is your experience of it and your memory of it. And if people keep watching this series and remember it, then the legacy of the man and the mall will live on forever. And I think that that's really special, and I hope you do too. And if you've made it this far, then thank you so much for watching. I actually wasn't going to cover this series initially. I was just going to record the next video in my Oppenheimer series, which will be next week. But as I was standing in the shower just this last week, I was thinking about The Oldest View, and the story and the message of it just kind of clicked for me. Like, I was just standing there, and in that moment, I got it. And so I knew I had to talk about it, and I had to share it with you all. And if I haven't said it at this point, please subscribe to Kane Pixels, enjoy his content, watch the series for yourself, and go back and watch his backroom stuff. He is a very talented creator who does amazing work. And with that, thank you so much for watching. And of course, a huge thank you goes to my patrons, Sean, and my top tier patrons, RD and Snowy. Thank you so much for supporting me and supporting my dream of doing this as a job for you all full time. It means the world, and I hope that you know that. Thank you so much. And thank you to all the subscribers so far. We are on the road to 500 subscribers, and it has been a great journey with you all. I'm very excited to talk about more things that I find interesting, stuff that I would love to share with you all. And if you want to stick around for the ride, then consider subscribing. And again, thank you so much, and I will see you next week for another video. I hope you're excited for that because I know that I am. And cut.